Let's take a moment to bow our heads and say a quick prayer before we begin our lesson. Dear God, please join us as we look at these stories. Help us to grow in knowledge of you and the works you have done. May our love and understanding of you grow as well. Amen. Hi guys, welcome to the first episode of St. Anne's Bible Basics. My name is Miss Lee, and I'll be here today talking about a story we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks about Abraham and his wife Sarah. And I think that wait, just a minute, hold on. Who are you?
Hi there, my name is Mei Zhong, and I'm a giant panda. You know, I really like this story of Sarah and Abraham. You know why? Well, in the Bible story, Sarah is a very old woman, and I am a very old giant panda. Nobody thought that old Sarah could have a baby, just like no one thought that I could have a cub. Well, you know what? Old Sarah did have a baby, and I did just have a cub. Here, you can see the news reports about it. Yep, right there, where the arrow's pointing. That's my baby cub. Anyway, enjoy this story, kids. Listen for God's miracles.
Thank you, May. And now we're going to look a little bit into the story of Abraham and Sarah. Let's start by looking at the Bible. If you've got one handy, take a look at it. It's a big book. The front half of it is called the Old Testament. Actually, it's a little more than a half. And the back part is the New Testament. If you open up the Old Testament, the larger part of the book in the front of the Bible, you're going to see there are books within it. There are actually 39 books in the Old Testament. The story of Abraham and Sarah is found in the first of these 39 Old Testament books. It's in the book of Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis starts with stories about the creation of the world. It shows that God has been around forever and is omnipotent. He's very powerful. In Genesis, we hear the story of God's creation of the Garden of Eden. We'll learn there about Adam and Eve, two friends of God who disappointed him. You also hear the story about Noah and the ark, which I have a feeling you've probably already heard about. After Noah, time goes on, and the people of the world once again sort of lose their connection with God. And God, once again, is disappointed because he wants a relationship with the people he's created. So God looks around and looks down with favor upon two people who he finds who have remained faithful to him. And then we come to the story of Abram and Sarai.
Stories of the Bible. Abram to Abraham.
This is Abram, who will later be known as Abraham.
Hey!
When Abram was in the land called Canaan, God told him to look over the land as far as his eyes could see. God promised that the land would be blessed and that Abram would have many children. 25 years passed. Abram and Sarai were very old and still had no children. God appeared to Abram and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm your shield. A son is coming. Look at the heavens and count the stars. Someday you will have as many children as there are stars in the sky." Then God told Abram that his name would no longer be Abram, but it would be Abraham, which means father of many nations. God also told Abraham that Sarai's name would be changed to Sarah. God promised to bless Sarah and told Abraham that she would become pregnant and have a son. God made a covenant with Abraham that day. His covenant was a promise that Abraham would have many sons and they would be blessed.
Thanks to the folks at Saddleback Kids for that fun video. Now that we've had a little taste of this story that takes place over a long time, let's turn to the Bible. We're going to be reading the story of Abraham from the Children's Bible in 365 Stories. It's one of my favorite ones. The story of Abraham. God calls Abraham. Many of Shem's descendants lived in cities on the rich, fertile plains of Mesopotamia. In one of these cities, called Ur, lived a man named Abraham. Ur was a fine city. There were merchants and scribes and comfortable houses for rich and wealthy citizens like Abraham. The people worshipped the moon goddess at the beautiful Ziggurat temple. One day, God spoke to Abraham. He had something very surprising to say. "Leave Ur," God said, "and set out for a country that I will show you. I will make you great and bless you. I will make you a blessing to all people everywhere." Abraham had to think hard. If he did as God said, he would leave the comfort of city life and have no settled home. He would live in a tent, moving from one source of water to the next. But Abraham trusted God enough to obey him. He and Sarah, his wife, packed up their possessions and got ready to leave Ur. At first, they stayed at Haran, many miles to the north, until Abraham's old father died. Then Abraham, Sarah, and Lot, their nephew, set off on the journey that would last for the rest of Abraham's life. Abraham and Sarah had no children, but there were many servants and herdsmen belonging to Lot, as well as to Abraham. There were sheep and goats and donkeys to carry all the baggage. Slowly, they trekked from one well or spring to the next, setting up their large black goatskin tents. They were making their way to the country of Canaan, as God told Abraham to do. Hey guys, did you notice the misspelled word on that page? Take a look. One of the fun things about doing this online is that whenever I feel like it, I can just pop in a reading from a different Bible. I'm going to read another story about Abraham from the Complete Illustrated Children's Bible. Going separate ways. Abraham and his nephew Lot had large flocks of cattle, sheep, and donkeys, so large that there wasn't enough grazing land for them all, and their herdsmen began to fight. Abraham decided that they would have to split up. He gave Lot the first choice of where to go, and Lot chose to leave Canaan and set off east to the fertile Jordan Valley. Abraham stayed in Canaan. After Lot had left, God called Abraham to him. "Look as far as you can. All the land that you can see, I will give to you and your children forever. Your children shall be like the dust of the earth. There will be so many of them that no one will be able to count them." Now we're going to read a story about God's promise to Abraham. Lot chose the green plain of Jordan and left his uncle Abraham to wander the bare, rocky hills. In spite of choosing the best for himself, Lot was soon in trouble. He settled in Sodom, one of the cities on the plain. War broke out between chiefs of nearby cities, and Lot was taken hostage by a chieftain who raided Sodom. Abraham quickly came to the rescue with a strong band of his own men and set Lot free. Abraham would not take payment or reward from the chiefs he had helped, but God talked to Abraham once more, saying, "Don't be afraid, Abraham. I will keep you safe, and I will give you a great reward." Abraham wanted neither riches nor honor. There was only one thing he and Sarah longed for, a child of their own. "What good will riches do me?" he asked bitterly. "I have no son to inherit my wealth. Sarah and I are too old now to have children. When I die, one of my slaves will be my heir." "Come outside your tent," God told him, "and look up at the sky." Abraham went out into the cool evening air. The night was bright with stars. "Can you count those stars?" God asked. "I promise that you will have as many descendants as there are stars in the sky. I am the God who brought you out of Ur. I will be your God and your children's God forever. I am going to give you and Sarah a son, and I will give you this country for his descendants to live in." Although God's promise sounded impossible, as Abraham stood there in the velvety darkness, he believed with all his heart that God would keep his word. God was glad that Abraham trusted him. He accepted Abraham because he put his whole faith in God. Now we're going to talk about another important person in the story of Abraham and Sarah. It's a woman named Hagar. This story is called Hagar Runs Away. God had solemnly promised Abraham that he would have a son, even though he and Sarah were old. But the years went by, and no child was born. Every year that passed made it less likely that Sarah would have a baby, for she was getting very old. Sarah was sad that they had no child, but she thought of a way which she and Abraham could become parents. She decided to copy the custom of the people who lived around in order to solve their problem. She would let Abraham marry her slave girl, Hagar. When Hagar had a child, it would count as theirs. Abraham agreed to her plan, and soon Hagar found that she was expecting a child. She began to boast and put on airs. She thought she was more important than her mistress now. At last, Sarah could bear it no longer. "It's your fault," she complained to Abraham. "My slave girl despises me." "Do as you like with her," Abraham replied. Sarah treated Hagar so badly and made her so unhappy that she ran away. Hagar wandered for a long time in the dry, hot desert. At last she sat down by a desert spring, tired and thirsty. Then God, who had seen all that had happened, spoke to Hagar gently. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm running away from my mistress," Hagar replied. "Go back to her," God said. "I have heard your tears and cries. I will look after you. You will have a son and call him Ishmael." Hagar thought it was wonderful that God should see and help her when she was just a poor slave girl whom nobody thought was important. She called him the God who sees. Then, content, she went back to her mistress Sarah. Not long afterwards, her son Ishmael was born. Now I'm going to pull another Abraham and Sarah story from the Children's Illustrated Bible. This Bible has a lot of interesting little sidebars that can give us some insight into life in the days of Abraham and Sarah. Time passed, and God appeared to Abraham near the trees of Mamre in the heat of the day. Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent when he looked up and saw 3 strangers standing before him. At once he came out to greet them. "My lords," Abraham said, bowing low, "if I have found favor with you, do not pass me by. Come, sit under this tree, so you may wash your feet and rest. Then we will bring you food, for we are your servants." Abraham then hurried back into the tent, giving orders to Sarah to bake bread and for a tender young calf to be roasted. He stood by them under the tree while they ate. "Where is your wife?" they asked. "She is in the tent." "Soon she will bear you a son." Now, Sarah was listening to this, and she laughed at the idea that such an old woman should bear a child. But God heard her and rebuked her. "Do you think there is anything too difficult for God to do?" he asked her. We've covered a lot so far in our study of Abraham and Sarah, and I promise you this will be the last 2 stories we'll read today. This is the story of Isaac's birth. Of course, God kept his promise to Abraham and Sarah, just as he had said. And at the time he had foretold, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy. She was so happy that she laughed for joy. When the time came to give the baby a name, Abraham called him Isaac, which means he laughs. Perhaps he was given the name because he was such a happy, smiling baby, but it was also a reminder forever of the joy and happiness that his birth had brought to his aged parents. Sarah must have remembered that other time when she had laughed, because she could not believe God's wonderful promise that she would really have a son of her own. Baby Isaac soon grew and began to toddle everywhere. One day Sarah looked out of the tent and saw big half-brother Ishmael teasing Isaac and making fun of him. Sarah wanted to take the side of her own special son. She hurried away to find Abraham and asked him to send Ishmael and his mother, the slave girl Hagar, packing. Abraham was sad and troubled. Isaac was indeed the promised son. God had given him to them by a miracle. But Ishmael was Abraham's son too. He did not want to harm him. God comforted and reassured Abraham. "You may do as Sarah says," God told him. "I will take care of Ishmael." Abraham agreed to Sarah's plan to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Next morning, he filled a leather bottle with water and packed up some food. Then he gave them to Hagar and told her to take her son and set off to make a life of their own, away from the safety and protection of his tents. Hagar and Ishmael wandered over the rough, dry countryside, not knowing where to go. The sun burned fiercely down. Soon they had eaten their supply of food. Worse still, there was not one drop of water left in the skin bottle. Hagar knew that they could not hope to live for long without water in the burning heat. Already Ishmael was weak and light-headed. They could not go any farther. Hagar helped Ishmael to lie down in a patch of shade beside a bush. Then she walked away. She could not bear to hear his moans or see his parched, swollen lips, she knew that he would soon die. But God heard Ishmael's cries. He spoke to Hagar. "Don't be frightened, Hagar," God said. "Go to Ishmael and comfort him. He will not die. I will take care of him and make his children into a great family." Then God opened Hagar's eyes. Close by, she caught sight of a well of pure cold water. Thankfully, she filled the skin bottle to the brim. Then she put the life-giving water to Ishmael's lips. She knew that God, who had seen her and helped her when she had run away from Sarah, was with her still, watching over them both. Phew! We just covered a lot of stories about Abraham and Sarah. Thank you for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed them. We've got more to tell next week. Join us again next week as we look into why God chose Abraham to be the father of a great nation of people.